This is the Garis masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 534, part 2, entitled How Close is the Negro-Slave, Man-Slave Analogy? Continuing straight on. Some women have argued with me that Negro slavery and man-slavery are not comparable, not analogous. I disagree, and this flyer is mostly concerned with that disagreement. To take the women's point of view, they argue that maybe some women don't bother to properly FIP up, but millions do, so that not all men are man-slaved the way all Negroes, almost, in the southern US states were slaves. That is true, but since the masculists estimate that about 80% of young women in today's world choose to become fluffy crappers by choosing to study fluffy crap majors, in brackets, the intellectually easy, intellectually lazy, memory-based majors that do not require analytic thought like math and the sciences, then these high school fluffy crappers are forced to study more fluffy crap majors at college because they are excluded from studying STEM fields and the professions at university because they did not acquire the math and science prerequisites at high school, close brackets. So these fluffy crappers then end up with a fluffy crap diploma that the economy does not value, so are unable to pay for a middle-class house that she wants to raise her kids in. So in her 30s, when her biological clock is ticking hard, she hunts around for some gullible, ignorant, in brackets, of masculists and MGTOW ideas, close brackets, man-slaveable man to parasite off, to leech off, to live off his money and labour for decades of his life. Then a decade later, once she has got her kids and lives in a nice middle-class house, she will drag her husband, her 41st penis, whom she is bored with, into the hated, fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system and have him financially butchered, stripping him of his kids, taking his house, half his wealth, half his stuff, force him to pay child payments, and if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her by the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court system to get off her fat parasitic ass and FIP up. No wonder masculists have such a hatred of the fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts, who are doing this to men, to one father in 4, committing a massive gender crime on men in an era in which, thanks to men, women have a life expectancy of 85 years and hence a career window of half a century. So have a powerful moral duty, say the masculists, to get off their fat parasitic asses and FIP up by getting career competent educations so that they can be proper FIPs as adults, pulling their own financial weight and not expecting fluffy style to manslave a man for decades of his life. Now we come to the heart of the women's critique, who say that manslavery is not comparable to Negro slavery, and that is that these fluffy women are capable of earning some money, although often a lot less than men. That is true. But the masculists say that given the enormity of the numbers of men who are man-slaved in this way, the problem is in fact far worse than Negro slavery, given the 1,000-fold greater number of man-slaves than Negro slaves. Let's try to quantify this. Let's say a man earns double what his wife earns when they are both working, after the wife, the mother, returns to work after looking after very small kids. Let's define the exploitation rate, ER, of the husband by the wife by the formula. ER equals husband's wage minus wife's wage all over husband's wage. So if he earns double what she earns, then his ER is half, 0.5. For a Negro slave, the slave owner is the equivalent of a wife who pays a Negro slave nothing. So the wife's, in brackets, that is slave owner's, wage is effectively 0. So the ER for the Negro slave is 1, so 1.0. That is twice as bad as the previous case. So in that sense, the female critics are right. But there are 1,000-fold more man-slaves in the world than Negro slaves. So if one calculates the total ER for the two populations, that is the Negro slaves and the man-slaves, there's no comparison. The latter is hugely larger. For example, total ER for Negro slaves is 2 million times 1. That's 2 million. Whereas for manslavery, the total ER for man-slaves is 2 billion times a half. That's 1 billion. So even though the manslave as an individual is less enslaved by his fluffy wife than a Negro slave by a slaver of blacks, the hugely greater number of man-slaves in the world makes the above mitigating factor very small beer. So the masculists are right by claiming that manslavery by fluffies is a hugely greater gender crime against men by hated fluffy parasites than the crime of Negro slavery in the 1800s. The rise of masculism in the 21st century will prove to be of comparable historical significance as was the rise of feminism. Personally, I see 3 major pillars in the history of gender politics. Keeping it simple, the first was the pill that enabled women to choose reliably the number of kids they wanted, which was 0, 1 or 2 mostly. So women had time on their hands, which enabled feminism, that is female careerism, that in turn enabled masculism, that is the liberation of men from being man-slaves to women, working for women for decades of their lives so that men became free to live alternative lifestyles. I believe that future gender historians will agree with the idea of the masculists, that the historical importance of masculism will prove to be as significant as that of feminism. We masculists are playing our role in shaping history, liberating billions of men from man-slavery at the hands of the hated fluffies, whom we masculists aim to wipe out, forcing them to FIP up or they rot on the shelf, thus removing their fluffy man-slaving genes from the gene pool. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 530 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.